Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Esterl. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be the service leader today. Welcome to Decorah UU. We are a welcoming, lay-led spiritual community moving together in time in an open search for truth and meaning. We believe in people's inherent capacity to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment, pursuing the good of humanity. Just a reminder that this service is being both live streamed and recorded. Anything you say will therefore be publicly available online. If you are visiting us today, we welcome you. Please note that you can complete the form at decorahuu.org/contact-us to receive our weekly electronic newsletter or to learn more about our congregation. You can learn more about Unitarian Universalism at uua.org. For the sake of those who may be joining us by audio only, I will read some of the announcements that have been printed in our bulletin. Just a reminder that we are continuing every other Sunday services, so there is no service next Sunday. Carolyn, would you mind reading the description for our next service?
Yes. The social determinants of health. Luther College professor Marina Basilovich will speak about the intersections between health disparities and racism and the overarching concept of social determinants of health. Dr. Basilovich has been a professor in the anthropology department and women and gender studies program since 2010, focusing on the topics of medical anthropology, body and health, and post-socialism.
Thank you. Just so everybody knows, the next meeting of the Decorah UU Board of Trustees is going to be on Tuesday, October 6th, 7 p.m. via Zoom. Also, keep in mind that we are going to be doing our auction this year. It will be in December. It will be virtual, but some of you may have some physical objects that you would like to contribute to that as you're cleaning out houses, et cetera, during this time of COVID. So set aside any of those. Don't just take them to the depot. I mean, of course, you're welcome to take them to the depot, but if you think something is a good candidate for the auction, set it aside, wait, and take a picture of it. And we could include that in our auction in December. Every year, excuse me, that went back quickly and I don't know why. All right, we auction off our talents, services, homegrown vegetables, homemade goods, arts, crafts, our closet treasures, and the funds that we raise help our own congregation in part, but they also go to the Northeast Iowa Community Action Corporation's Low Income Heating Assistance Program. And if you have any questions, you can contact Carolyn Corbin at carolyn@corbingroup.biz or Julie Odie at littleredkayak@gmail.com. Some other kind of ongoing announcements, just a reminder that if you need support, contact Otter Dreaming, our fellowship coordinator. We have a membership emergency fund. We have the ability to help one another in terms of getting groceries and other things that might be challenging during this time of the pandemic. So we have that kind of internal support for our fellowship. Don't forget that you can take advantage of it. Also, remember that we have circles. So circles are these smaller gatherings of members and friends of Decorah UU who are encouraged to continue to stay in touch with one another socially outside of services, even though that might be distant socially, even if it's a Zoom meeting or something else, just trying to remain connected to one another. And if you don't remember if you're even in a circle, if you know you're in a circle, but you don't remember who else is in the circle, if you have any questions about circles, you can contact Sue Audie at sueaudie@gmail.com or at her home phone number 563-419-5396.
And Karen, could I just add a little something to that?
Of course, this is Sue Audie speaking.
Here I am. I just wanted to say that in the summertime, many of us have been connecting outdoors a little easier. And we've seen people, and I know when my husband and I go on walks, we we will see someone in the yard that we know and we'll stop and chat. And so we've been able to do that in this time. But as we move into the fall and the cooler weather, and also the weather that's maybe less easy to be walking around as the snow and ice starts to come, oh, it will be coming. So let's remember that maybe we need to think a little more carefully about the circles as we move into this time and start to find ways to connect once again, because we know this is going to be a tough winter in so many ways. Thanks.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have opportunities for calling one another, for even writing one another letters. And, you know, we do have this Decorah using account that can be used not just for Sunday meetings, but to host other meetings for circles. So, you know, and I know for ourselves, like we've talked about, well, what can we do in our own garage if we have heaters? Like if we can stay outside, but stay at least 6 feet apart from one another. So there are all sorts of possibilities. We'll need to get creative, but yeah, it's going to be harder when it's a little more difficult to be outside and to interact with people. So the circles will have regained importance, I think. Another reminder is that if you're interested in previous services, they are available online. We have our own YouTube channel. If you go to decorahuu.org, there's an icon for YouTube that you can click on to go there. There's also a service archive where you could just delve into particular services, read more about them, and click through to see the YouTube recording. And as ever, the Decorah Community Food Pantry continues to need volunteers and financial support. And then there's also, remember, the Mail Cheer program, which again, especially as we go into the colder months, might be especially important to connect with people who may not have a lot of other opportunities for human interaction. You can learn more about that at decorahnow.com. Are there other announcements that folks would like to add? If you're joining online, you can click on participants and then click on raise hand, and then I can recognize you to speak. If you're a co-host, you'll just have to speak up because you don't get to raise your hand. And then after I have recognized the online participants, I'll also give an opportunity for any phone-only participants to share. I don't think we have any right now. But any other announcements? Nancy, I see you're unmuted right now, but I'm assuming that's just because we were talking earlier and you'll be doing the reading later.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I think that we're good as far as announcements are concerned, but I will say if you are on the phone that you would press *6 to unmute. But as I said, I'm not seeing any phone-only folks. All right, we'll move forward. Today's service is related to our monthly theme. The theme for September has been justice, and it explores the 6th UU principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. So I decided for lighting the chalice today, I found a video of our friends in La Crosse UU lighting their chalice. So I was like, well, that'd be kind of fun to see what their chalice looks like as we read our own chalice lighting. I'm going to ask everybody to mute if you're not already muted while I read this aloud, but I'm going to encourage you to read along at home as the glories of peace. These shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall sit under their own vines and fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid. From Micah 4:3. All right, moving on, and I will restart my video. We are currently physically in many different locations, but we would normally convene in the Lingonberry in downtown Decorah. Considering that sacred space, we offer this acknowledgement, building upon text offered by Luther professors Holly Moore, Anna Peterson, and David Faldette, as well as by the U.S. Departments of Arts and Culture in partnership with Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that Northeast Iowa was home to the Iowa, whose traditional name is Bakoshe, the Sac and Fox, the Fox's traditional name is Meskwaki, the Dakota, and the Ho-Chunk, sometimes called Winnebago, though the origin of this name is derogatory, meaning people of the dirty water. Peoples whose relationship to this land continues today. I invite you to take a moment for reflection upon the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that have shaped our presence here today, and to adopt an attitude of reverence and gratitude for the ongoing resilience of this place and the people who have called it home. This is the time in our service when we invite anyone who wishes to do so to share with us a personal joy, concern, or milestone in your life. Again, please use the raise hand feature if you're joining online, and then I will be sure to give phone-only participants an opportunity to speak too. Once more, please remember that this is being live streamed and recorded. Suadi. I see your hand up, or you're on mute still.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to raise up our friend and member Paige Murphy this morning. Paige has been going through some pretty serious health concerns, and she needs perhaps some surgery. But of course, she has to wait, even though she's in pain. She has to wait for Medicare to approve her surgery. So, as we think about this is our healthcare system and all the problems that have come from it. We also know personally all these folks who are our own loved ones and friends who are suffering because of the problems with our healthcare. So I hope you'll all keep Paige in mind this morning.
Thank you, Sue. Carrie?
Hi, I have a joy and a concern. My joy is that on September 20th, Mark and I celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary. And that was really nice. We had a very nice time. We had a dinner from Rubaiyat. And it feels, even though it's not 20, it feels like a big milestone, because I said, now we're officially an adult. I am sorry, that's corny, but anyway, my concern is Mark's health has been deteriorating a bit, and he has found that he does have congestive heart failure and diabetes and other issues with his liver. And I don't know how much longer he has. But I'm hoping that he'll be able to live a good, long life, and that he will be healthy for as long as he can be. But we're looking into disability as an option.
Thank you, Carrie. Is there anyone else who would like to share a joy, a concern, a sorrow? Steve. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Unmute. There I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Haven't been on service for a while. Just wanted to let you know I have a joy. I'll be celebrating my 72nd anniversary anniversary, 72nd birthday.
It's the anniversary of your birth.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah.
This coming Tuesday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Any other joys or sorrows that folks would like to share? All right, I am lighting a virtual candle for joys or concerns that are unspoken, but that remain in our hearts and minds. Please join me for a moment of silent meditation. Even though we are meeting via Zoom, we continue to require the gracious gifts of our members and friends to support our congregation. We understand that present circumstances and uncertainty may affect your ability to provide financial support at this time, but if you can and would like to give and you're online, you can visit decorahuu.org and click on the Give Online button in the middle of the page to learn of numerous ways to give. They include, but they are not limited to PayPal. I'll just throw out there that I guess for at least 6 years that I've just set up a monthly gift through an ACH deposit from my bank directly to Decorah UU. And then I don't even have to think about it. If you're in a position to be able to do that, I really encourage it. It's a very easy way to give. But not everybody's in that situation. So you could use PayPal to do ad hoc giving. You can also, of course, mail in any financial support that you wish to provide at Decorah UU, PO Box 382, Decorah, Iowa 52101. That's PO Box 382. Note that part of our fellowship's commitment and outreach to our community is to support worthy organizations. And for September through October, our Share the Plate recipient is Northeast Iowa Community Action Corporation, also known as NEICAC. And that's the same organization that I mentioned earlier that has the low income heating and energy assistance program that we'll be helping to support with our auction later this year. If you want to learn more about NEICAC, you can visit their website, neicac.org. If you want to direct your giving to them, you can indicate that on the check if you're mailing one. If you're using PayPal on our website, you can select Share the Plate from the dropdown. In honor of the ways that we support our congregation and our community, we will now sing the offertory. I'm using another YouTube video for the offertory this time, so let's see if you can hear it. Please remain on mute, but sing along at home. If you don't hear anything, many of you know the lyrics and the song, and so sing to yourselves as you watch my mouth move, and we will get through the offertory.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use to build the and make our own days glad.
So based on the thumbs up I got from Nancy, I think y'all could even hear that one. All right, cool. Nancy, would you please help us with our reading?
Yes, the reading this morning is from a man by the name of Demetrius. I found this on a link online from the Free Minds Book Club and Writing Workshop, which helps teenagers charged and imprisoned as adults in the DC and federal prison system. It helps young men give voice to their experiences through poetry, and the poets declined to use their last names since the poems were published while they were incarcerated. So this is from Demetrius and is entitled, I Bang the Poems. I bang the poems for all problems in all shapes, sizes, and forms. I bang the poems for all weather, cold, hot, and sometimes warm. I bang the poems for the people who are looking for a sunny day but can only find a storm. I bang the poems for the prison population that's steadily growing. I bang the poems for the parents whose children get snatched off the streets without them even knowing. I bang the poems for all instruments, tubas, drums, and even French horns. I bang the poems for areas in poverty where every day guns are drawn. I bang the poems for my friend Dalwayne, who died of a gunshot hole in the same spot where his hat was worn. I bang the poems to death from the day I was born.
Thank you, Nancy, both for finding this poem and for reading it with us. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Professor Scott Hurley, Assistant Professor in Religion and Paideia at Luther College. His research interests include new religions of China and Japan, early and mid-20th century Chinese Buddhism, animal rights and welfare issues. And he will be speaking about you and the school to prison pipeline, what's whiteness got to do with it. And now he gets to enjoy the experience of sharing his screen, which will hopefully go more smoothly for him.
Hello, everyone. That's actually quite an old description of who I am and what I do anymore. But that's okay. That's okay.
Well, I'd wondered because I was like, I don't think he's in religion anymore, but this is what I was given. So this is what I'm going to read.
Right. I'm still in religion.
Okay.
I'm associate professor now, and I focus a lot on issues around hierarchical ideologies and how they impact our world. So racism, sexism, also speciesism, ableism, and so on. So I'm very happy. I didn't realize that you had a land acknowledgement statement. I was actually going to begin with a land acknowledgement statement of my own. So, but I'll move on from that because every time I've gone through this presentation, it's taken me much longer than it's supposed to take me. So I'm going to do my best here. So I'm going to share a screen with you, a PowerPoint presentation. I think this will work. Actually, let me stop that share for a minute. All right, so I've entitled this presentation, You and the Schools in Pipeline, What's Whiteness Got to Do with It? This particular presentation, these slides that I have here were put together by myself and Professor Jill Lee Otley. We teach a class together, we've done it for a number of years now, called Making Decisions in US Schools. It's a course that addresses various ethical issues that are associated with public schools. And we spend much of our time talking about issues around racism, ableism, sexism, heteronormativity, and so on. So we spent this last September term doing this class where we really focus on the ways that whiteness is centered in our U.S. schools, right? And the way that our U.S. schools are founded on white supremacist ideology. So I'm going to start just quickly with some history, and this is sort of spotty, and I'm going to go through it quickly. But just in order to kind of support my thesis, which is essentially that our U.S. schools are sort of founded on the centering of whiteness, on white supremacist ideology, and they continue to operate in that way. And that the school to prison pipeline, which I'm going to focus on, is a manifestation of that focus or centering of whiteness. So I don't think I need to talk a whole lot about education, the opportunities for learning in the antebellum South during the period of enslavement. They were really not available. And in fact, Black folks who engaged in any kind of attempt to learn to read or write often could suffer serious punishment, even death, right? I do want to point out, however, that this was true in the antebellum North as well. That is, that there were racist policies that kept Black folks from getting an education. There are notable exceptions. In fact, there were even some schools that were created specifically for Black folks, but they often were the recipients of what I might call white rage, and which manifested often in racist policies that made it difficult for those schools to continue to operate. It's also worth noting that Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, who created their own plans for the development of public schools in the United States. Both, of course, were enslavers. And when they were designing these programs, and they differed in significant ways, but when they were designing these programs, they were not concerned about educating African-American folks. They were concerned mostly with creating programs for white folks, and particularly white men, right? After the age of enslavement, the period of enslavement came to an end. We have the creation of the Black Codes. Many of you probably are aware of this. 1865 and 1866, these codes were put in place that, among other things, criminalized Black and brown folks not having jobs, right? And if you wanted to demonstrate that you had a job, you had to have a white person sign off on that, right? If you were caught without a job, you were fined, which of course, if you don't have a job, you aren't making any money, you have no way to to pay those fines, and so you were often imprisoned. The relevance of this to my presentation will become clear as we go on. Children of those people that were imprisoned were often forced into apprenticeships with planters, with plantation owners, and asked to work without pay to pay off those fines, right? So again, we have another form of enslavement that is taking place. Keep going on to Jim Crow etiquette and laws. Perhaps the most well-known decision is the Plessy versus Ferguson decision of 1896, which essentially upheld state-imposed Jim Crow laws. Whole notions of separate but equal, right? Of course, and we know that there was nothing equal about the facilities that were available to Black and brown folks, and that's true, of course, for schools. Brown versus Board of Education. So why do I have this here, right? Because this is heralded as a victory, a civil rights victory that allowed for the desegregation of schools and the integration of Black children into white schools. But there has been a number of scholars that have pointed out that nevertheless, white supremacist ideology attempted to control the way that this played out. Not only, of course, did we see white rage, right, responding to Black children trying to go to white schools, but what we saw happening is that Black teachers, Black administrators lost their jobs, right? But because they were Black, and because white folks didn't want their kids to be taught by Black teachers. The assumption was that Black teachers and Black administrators were not as well educated. This is not true. So we have from the very beginning, right, of this sort of desegregation period, we have from the very beginning a situation in which Black children are not being taught by people who look like them, right? And we still have this problem now. Okay, and then finally, and again, there's a whole lot of things I'm skipping here, but finally we can talk about the resegregation of schools. In some ways, we could say, in fact, in all ways, really, we could say that schools today are more segregated or just as segregated as they were before Brown versus Board of Education. And this is in part because of white flight, right? White families moving out of neighborhoods, right? Pulling their kids out of schools where more and more Black children are attending, creating their own districts, their own schools that are predominantly white. There's been legal pushback against this. Notable cases that white folks who are trying to do this have lost, but nevertheless, this is a phenomenon that we see. Okay, all of this really is my attempt, again, to say that whiteness really is at the center of the public school system, and perhaps some of you have read Guy Nave's response to the Breonna Taylor case, not holding police accountable for the killing or murdering of Breonna Taylor. And in talking about the judicial system and the policing system, he writes, quote, "The system is not broken. It does what it was designed to do," unquote. So this is the recognition that it is inherently racist, and it continues to do what it was designed to do. And my argument is that this is true of our public schools. And this again will make some more sense. Okay, school to prison pipeline. Look, to argue about the centering of whiteness in public schools, we could have talked about all kinds of different things, right? I could have talked about the whitewashing of curriculum, right? What's left out of history, who's not read in our English classes and so on, right? But I'm going to talk instead about the school to prison pipeline, right? So what is it? Here's a definition I have. The school to prison pipeline refers to the disproportionate tendency of Black and brown children and young adults to become incarcerated because of increasingly harsh school and municipal policies, right? So this incarceration, right, comes in a variety of forms, but what we see generally, and I'm going to demonstrate for you, is that Black and brown students are suspended at higher rates, are expelled at higher rates, and are arrested, right, in our schools in disproportionate numbers to white students, okay? And what we also know is that even one suspension for a student increases the chance that they will drop out of school and that they will end up being incarcerated, if not as a youth, later as an adult, okay? So let's set the stage a little bit for how this works. We have what is called a variety of policies that are referred to as zero tolerance policies. That is, if you act in this way, you behave in this way, there is an immediate response, disciplinary response, and it's non-negotiable. Okay. So some of you may remember this, right? In 1994, we had the Gun-Free School Act that was signed into law by President Bill Clinton. This mandated a year-long out-of-school suspension for any student caught bringing a firearm to school. Now, look, nobody is arguing that that we shouldn't respond to students that bring firearms to school. The question really is it reasonable to have a non-negotiable response and a year-long out-of-school suspension for students who do this, not investigating at all what their circumstances or situations are, and knowing also that such suspensions end up causing or leading to the dropping out of school and ultimately being incarcerated. Now, these laws, and then these zero tolerance policies come out of a growing concern for crime and violence. Okay. The unfortunate side of this, though, is that they were extended to include not just firearms, but other weapons, right? As well as drug offenses and other behaviors. We have stories of students, primarily Black and brown, that have been suspended or expelled for pointing their fingers in a gun fashion at another kid, right? Or carving a gun shape out of a Pop-Tart. Okay, so there has been this literally zero tolerance for any of these kinds of behaviors. Now, schools are a reflection of our society, right? And so we have a number of laws, and by the way, this slide comes from some work that Richard Merritt and I have done together looking at the prison industrial complex. But what we have in society at large is the creation of these harsh penalties for the use of drugs. So we have the Rockefeller drug laws, 1973. We have the phrase war on drugs that was coined or put forward by President Nixon in 71 and then really taken up by Reagan in the 80s. We have 3 strikes, you're out laws, right? That, of course, disproportionately affect minority offenders, right? So in some cases over the years, these laws have softened, okay? 3 strikes, you're out laws still exist in a number of states today, but they have changed slightly. So it's no longer if you were imprisoned for a violent offense and you commit any other kind of offense, right, violent or not, that you would be put in prison. Now, in some places like California, it has to be 3 violent responses, 3 violent convictions or strikes, if you will. But nevertheless, I'd ask you to think about the rhetoric that we are hearing now, especially the rhetoric that's coming out of the current administration, right? First in June and since then many times, Donald Trump has said, quote, "I am your president of law and order," right? And so these issues still apply to the way that we deal with folks today, right? And so again, zero tolerance policies, right, are informed by these attitudes about discipline and how you deal with certain kinds of behaviors from our society at large. I put this here. I know this is difficult to see. I know that this can be traumatic, right? But we remember Columbine, right? A mass school shooting that took place in 1999. Of course, there have been relatively many mass school shootings since 1999, and some of them quite recently. Which, if you remember, right, I said here, the Gun Free Schools Act was put into law in 1994, has done really little to prevent these kinds of shootings from taking place, right? So this was one of the reasons that we saw these zero tolerance policies put into effect and that we see them continuing to be put into effect is because of this concern. But in fact, they're not really addressing this concern. In fact, what we see is that the vast majority of youth who are confined, that is incarcerated, right, whether in juvenile detention or if they are of age in prison, for nonviolent offenses, right? And we really ought to read this slide as most Black and brown youth are confined for nonviolent offenses. I understand that you all watched the first 20 minutes of 13th, and there you would have learned, right, that there's a disproportionate number of Black and brown men and women in prison compared to white men and women, right? Well, this is certainly the case for young people. So only in as of 2010, it still applies now, as I'll make clear as we go along. Really, only 1 out of 4 students are confined for violent offenses. We have the appearance of school resource officers in schools, which are essentially police officers. Sometimes some are security guards, but most are police officers, right? Who have been employed to stay in the school for the day, right? Well, at least in its inception, when they started doing this, to protect students from these mass shootings. the original intent was not to police students, but that intent has been obscured, right? That what we see is the policing and surveillance of students in schools. Now, again, since the calls for defunding the police and the reactions to police brutality that we've seen, there have been a number of schools that have eliminated their school resource officers. But this is by no means all schools, and this is open for debate in a number of schools. I should also say that there's incentive for police officers to become a school resource officer because it is a sort of fast track way to becoming a detective, right? It's one of the stepping stones that one can take. So there is some incentive there. So instead, what we see is police officers arresting students for a variety of behaviors that are violent, right? And I'm going to talk about some of those in a minute, but we have to ask the question, right? Who are SROs really protecting? So if you look at this slide, and I'll just read the caption for you here. It says, even when controlling for school poverty, schools with an SRO had nearly 5 times the rate of arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without an SRO. So on this graph, you can see the bars in yellow, right? Schools that had an SRO were arresting students, right, for disorderly conduct. This means that schools have been giving up, right, their control and their responsibilities for for addressing certain kinds of behaviors and putting them in the hands of the SROs or the police, okay? The other thing we should take note here is what does disorderly conduct mean, right? It's a highly subjective term, right? And so again, we are arresting students for these subjective behaviors, and in doing so, increasing their risk of dropping out of school, and then of course becoming incarcerated as an adult. And here we really get to the meat of things, and I have a hard time seeing the damn thing anymore. But so you can see, right? You are looking at this graph. On the far left-hand side talks about enrollment and different racial groups, right? The top, the greenish blue, is white students. And then we'll look down at Black African-American students is in yellow, right? So we have enrollment, and then we have in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and multiple out-of-school suspensions, and then ultimately expulsions. And you can see from this graph that there's clearly a disproportionate number of Black and African-American students that are being suspended, expelled for conduct, right? And so it affects Black and brown students much more than white students, okay? And hold on to your hats for this next one. Preschool suspensions. I didn't realize until I started doing this research that we ever suspended preschoolers, right? This is pre-kindergarten children, okay? But the same applies here, right? The top of the graph there, the bars are for white students, right? The yellow again for Black and African-American students. And you can see clearly for out-of-school suspensions, single out-of-school suspensions and multiple out-of-school suspensions, there's a huge disproportionate number of Black children that are affected, okay? All right, I know I'm going through this quickly. I really do want to leave some time for discussion afterwards. Okay, look, the kinds of discipline, right? So if we look at the relatively minor offenses, comparing Black students and white students, we see that Black first-time offenders are suspended at higher rates than whites, right? And this is for cell phone use, dress code violations, disruptive behavior, and displays of affection, right? I mean, it's hard. It's hard to sort of not to guffaw at something like this, and to have your mouth fall open, right, for these these relatively minor offenses, and students are being suspended. Any students are being suspended for this. But on top of this, that we see again a disproportionate number of Black students that are affected. Okay. If we look at the kinds of behaviors that students are referred to police officers, right, SROs, or other disciplinary action, we see that white students are referred much more, generally speaking, for things like smoking, vandalism, leaving without permission, and obscene language. Very specific kinds of issues. Whereas Black students are referred more for disrespect, excessive noise, threat, and loitering. Again, highly subjective, right? What is considered disrespectful behavior? And even if there is, even if we could define easily what that is, should a student be referred to the SRO, right, or referred for suspension or expulsion, right, for such behavior? Again, white students are not being referred to these for these reasons. Okay, so what actually leads to these kinds of referrals are these highly strict zero tolerance policies put into place by schools and districts and the state law, right? And they're used to criminalize student behavior. We need to ask questions, right? Should students be arrested for disrupting school, right? What does even disrupting school mean, right? Should they be arrested for disorderly conduct? What is disorderly conduct, right? When does a disruption or when does disorderly conduct become criminal, right? These are the kinds of questions that we need to ask, right? Okay, so look. Whiteness. This practice, right, of marginalizing and really keeping Black and brown students from getting a quality education exists, I would argue, because we continue to center whiteness. We continue to operate from principles of white supremacy in our school systems, right, in our public school systems, right? These policies, zero tolerance and so on, are disproportionately affecting Black and brown students, right? Because we want to, or at least from a systemic point of view, we want to continue to privilege white folks and to center whiteness. Now, look, this slide, and this probably reiterates some of the things that you learned from 13th, right? But this is sort of going to the other end, right, of the school to prison pipeline, going to the sort of to the prison end, right? And what we know is that, one, there are a number of private prisons that are in place that make money from having people in prison, right? But they're few compared to state and federal prisons. What I want to point out to you, and again, this comes from the work that Richard Merritt and I have done, is that there are a number of corporations, right, that use inmate labor to create their products, right, and use it in some fashion or another, right? And let me just click on this, and you'll see these are the number of corporations. They are able to use inmate labor for nothing or for next to nothing. It is the cheapest labor available, right? So knowing that we have a disproportionate number of Black and brown folks in prison, and that their labor is being used to support these corporations, I'd ask you to think back about the Black codes and the way that people's children were forced into working for nothing, right? We might say this is another kind of enslavement. If we think about the school to prison pipeline, we are funneling Black and brown children into that pipeline, right? Ultimately to fill prisons, right? There's a lot of money to be made in keeping people in prison and, frankly, incentivizing recidivism. Okay, I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Oh, wow, Scott, thanks. I think I've never really understood how the zero tolerance history all adds up to kind of where we are right now. So
yeah.
What do you think, like for our own school district, do you think that the educators and administrators would have taken a course like this?
No, to be frank. So what I often hear from and I probably get myself in trouble for saying this, but what I often hear from our students who are in the Luther Education Department is that this is the first time they've heard about these kinds of things, right? And they're juniors and seniors, right? So they're about ready to graduate. So I would expect that many of the teachers that we see in, let's say, for example, Decorah schools, I mean, I can't know this for sure, right? But I would suspect that they have not talked about these things, have not thought about these things, and have not learned about these things.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. Very interesting story here. And it reminded me that I'm looking forward to this book coming out, I imagine sometime this year, by Donald Yacovone from Harvard, who has been researching. He started out researching the legacy of the anti-slavery movement, and he discovered textbooks and what they were teaching. And so he totally changed course. And he's writing a book now called Teaching White Supremacy, the textbook battle over race in American history. And I'm really looking forward to it because I think a lot of us really aren't aware of the underpinnings of our education system and how, as you mentioned, it's based on this understanding that we white people are what it's all about. And have you heard anything about the book or?
No, I have not. It sounds really interesting. There's another book that I would really recommend. It's called We Want to Do More Than Just Survive, by Bettina Love, who is a PhD in education. I'm blanking on where she is right now, but also raises some of these very same issues. Look, I'll just say that for me, I think that we have to interrogate every policy that's created in the United States, right? That it is all based on white supremacy and the centering of whiteness. And we need to ask how, right? We need to think, we need to be willing to and challenge ourselves, but also looking carefully at our policies. I mean, I take Ibram Kendi's point very seriously when he says, policies are either racist or anti-racist. There's no neutral ground, right? And I think that's right. I think what Guy Nave has said about our judicial and policing system is correct. I think it applies to schools, public schools.
Thank you.
So I posted in the chat that folks can go to Bettina Love, BETTINA love.com for more about the book that Scott just mentioned. I also wanted to note that I'd written in the chat earlier, Scott had used the phrase white rage. You may be interested in Carol Anderson's book, which is entitled White Rage. That I think the thesis of it is much like what Guy was saying, that a lot of the structures that we have in our government actually are expressions of white rage, and we've institutionalized our white rage. And so it seems less scary because it's all legal, but it's actually terrifying. So that's another resource for folks to look at. Carl, I see your hand is raised.
Can I just make a quick comment on that? I mean, keep in mind the black codes were legal, right? Jim Crow laws were legal, right, and enforced by the police and judiciary systems, right? So yeah. You know, the thing is that what Bettina Love and others are suggesting as far as discipline is concerned is that there are better ways, right? Look, when you have a zero tolerance policy, right, or you have a policy that demands that you do this without question, you are not taking into consideration at all what's going on in the life of that student, right? That might be affecting why they are having life difficulties at the moment, right? So other options would be things like restorative justice practices, right? Where students as well as faculty are involved in discussing both disciplinary policy, but also in addressing a violation of policy that is done by a particular student, right? When you have zero tolerance, none of that matters, and you end up putting children in very difficult situations, and particularly Black and brown children in those situations, right? And I would even say in-school suspensions. I'm glad that it was overall a positive. I don't know if the word positive is right there, but it was better than being out of school, right? But it still is. It's kind of a shaming endeavor, right? The student can no longer be part of the community. They have to be separated off. I think this is problematic, right? Again, I'm not suggesting that we don't respond to behaviors that could be dangerous, right? But again, even that, right? Some of the things that I showed, right? What are students being penalized for or disciplined for? And again, clearly Black and brown students are being disciplined for highly subjective behaviors. Not in all cases, of course, right? But comparatively speaking, disproportionately so.
Scott, when I used to teach high school English, and I know when I was there that we had to do what were called staff development units to, continue our education. Is there any integration between the education department at Luther and the local school system where educators, for instance, at Decorah High School, can take courses from Luther as part of their own staff development?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, well, because I along with Carolyn, I sit on this sort of community committee. It tries to hold Decorah schools accountable to dealing with issues around race and racism. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like the schools are not moving fast enough, right? And they're not moving fast enough, right? There's a lot more to say about that, I think, but there's a lot more that both Luther College as well as our Decorah schools, obviously, that can do in regards to this issue, right? There's a number of folks, a number of us that have been, trying to bring the issues around racism and the centering of whiteness to the foreground at Luther, as well as in the public schools.
Mm-hmm. In 1934, Huddy William Leadbelly Ledbetter recorded a version of the song, The Midnight Special, at Angola Prison for John and Alan Lomax, who mistakenly attributed it to him as the author. However, Ledbetter, for his Angola session, appears to have inserted several stanzas relating to a 1923 Houston jailbreak into what's actually a traditional song. Ledbetter recorded at least 3 versions of the song, one with the Golden Gate Quartet, a gospel group in 1940. John and Alan Lomax, in their book, Best Loved American Folk Songs, told a credible story identifying the Midnight Special as a train from Houston shining its light into a cell in the Sugar Land prison. They also described Ledbetter's version as the Negro jailbird's ballad to match Hard Times' Poor Boy. Like so many American folk songs, its hero is not a man, but a train. The light of the train is seen as the light of salvation, the train which could take them away from the prison walls. It is highly reminiscent of the imagery of such gospel songs as Let the Light from Your Lighthouse Shine on Me. Carl Sandburg had a different view. He believed the subject of the song would rather be run over by a train than spend more time in jail. The song, as popularized by Ledbetter, has many parallel lines to other prison songs.
You're trying to lose to my man, let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heaven loving light on me. When you get up in the morning, when that big bell rings, there's a marching to the table. You meet the same old thing, knocking poker on the table. Ain't nothing in my pants. Never said nothing about it. Have a trouble with the man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heaven loving light on me. If you ever go to Houston, boy, you better walk right. And you better not squabble. And you better not fight. Better Rocco will arrest you. Hit and boom and take it down. You can bet your bottom dollar that you're sugar land bound. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heaven loving light on me. Well, jumping little Judy, she was a mighty fine girl. She done brought jumping till there's a whole round world. When she brought it in the morning, there's a wife all day. When she brought me the news, and my wife was dead, that started me to grieving, whooping, hollering and crying. Then I began to worry about a great long time. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heaven loving light on me.
Thank you, everybody. Just a reminder again that we won't be gathering next Sunday, but you do have opportunities for online worship with other UU communities, including the Church of the Larger Fellowship, which is available at questformeaning.org. I'll stay on for a few minutes in case people want to visit with one another, and then we'll say goodbye for the week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
And special thanks to Nancy for all of her work to coordinate this service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.